Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. One of my slides has just disappeared. The slide that's disappeared is actually, I would like to add an acknowledgement to country. I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal, the grass people of the Eora Nation, on whose lands we're meeting today. It actually happens to be my office building. So this is genuinely where I usually turn up to work. Pure coincidence, it wasn't done on my behalf. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. The purpose of this next session is actually zooming out for a moment. I'm going to be spending a few minutes talking about the context in which both the ARDC sits and indeed the HASS in Indigenous Research Data Commons. You might know all of this. If you do, that's fantastic. It's important stuff. It's our sustainable future. If you don't, hopefully you'll know a little bit more by the end of the talk. So NCRIS is funded by the federal government, the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy, and the ARDC is one of the NCRIS family of capabilities. A really broad set. When I speak about this, I talk about NCRIS going from the oceans to the stars. We cover everything from marine observation through to the planets. And of course, ARDC, dealing with data and the digital world, is foundational for much of this activity. ARDC was incorporated as a company limited by guarantee back on the 31st of May 2019. How do I remember this? It's my birthday. Another serendipitous coincidence. We have expanded now to over 30 members. So there's no cost for an institution to join the ARDC, and the maximum liability is peppercorn, whether it's 100. Yeah, the company secretary's nodding at me, $100. Okay, so it's not about raising money. And we have expanded now to include medical research institutes. So the family continues to grow. And what does that mean? It means that the institutions and the medical research institutes see value in the work of the ARDC, value in your work. And that support's incredibly important in our messaging to government. So, ARDC, our purpose, really, really simple. Providing Australian researchers with competitive advantage through data. Now that phrase, competitive advantage, is a bit ambiguous, can mean different things to different people. That's really handy. Make it work for you. But of course, we have a special sauce. We have a really special ingredient that makes the ARDC work. This is it. This is the team. This is the team photographed at the most recent staff retreat in August. So it's as many as we could get together at that point in time. But that's everything. And I will never fail to pause and recognise that team that we absolutely cherish. Now, that's great, but we are in service. So who are we in service to? Well, first of all, it's for the researchers. Remember our purpose, providing Australian researchers with competitive advantage through data. They are our first audience. Then, everyone here that's concerned with building and operating and maintaining that research infrastructure, to preserving the archives, to building the tools and the platforms that allow us to work with that data. A really important part of the conversation. And then our stakeholders also include, of course, NCRIS, ARDC's members, and the institutions, funders, international and national data organisations. So we've just hosted International Data Week with the Research Data Alliance, with CoData and the World Data Systems. This is all part of our bigger ecosystem. So we're positioning the HASS and Indigenous Research Data Commons within this framework. ARDC does a lot of things. So this is our strategy on a page, it's on our website, it's in our year in review booklet. What we need to take from this is simply that we've got 4 different pillars of activity. There's the provision of skills. Without skills, the tools are useless. Car's no good if you can't drive it. The Nectar Research Cloud as the environment for operating, for analysis of that data. The National Information Infrastructure, so things like persistent identifiers. The world of ORCID, the world of RAID, the Research Activity ID. Some of these things aren't really everyday dinner conversation, but this and the metadata and the vocabularies are building blocks, underpinning foundations of research infrastructure. And then on your left-hand side, oh, I managed that behind me, that's good, we can see the thematic research data commons. So what is a research data commons? Lots of different interpretations of this. And again, the ARDC version is broad, flexible. That's one of our values. And it's the storage, the compute, the skills, the data, the models. All of these things come together to form a research data commons. And what we're trying to do in the HASS and Indigenous Research Data Commons is bring these components together to build a national capability for Australian researchers. So at different points in time, there could be more focus on models. There could be more on skills. But together, they are all the different components that we need, and each of us has a different role in contributing to that wonderful picture together. ARDC has 3 research data commons. Very soon I am going to write the story. A number of years have passed since the 3 research data commons were formed. I won't go into that today because I'm now negotiating with my timekeeper just a tiny bit more. So we also have the people research data commons, looking at health and medical data. Planet is what it says on the tin for earth and environmental sciences, and of course the HASS and Indigenous. And critically, that wonderful team of people that are working across these to share knowledge, best practice and innovation. But we're all here to focus on the HASS and Indigenous Research Data Commons for the next couple of days. Now I'm leading you down to the 6 different focus groups here. I'm sure that most of the people in the audience will have close links with one of those 6. I won't go through them because you will be hearing from them throughout the course of the symposium. Lots of information on both this particular activity and people and planet. Our website is littered, I think, with QR codes and lots more for you to cover. I believe that is a good place for me to stop. Could go on, but won't, because we have an exciting panel to cover next.
You should sack your timekeeper because he cut you a minute off.
Oh, lordy.
So you can talk for a little bit more if you want to. Is there any questions? Thank you, Rosie, and apologies for having to rush through. You didn't have to rush through. You know, patience is a virtue. Ah.
My time's not done.
Oh, that's good. Well, then I'll get Nicola to come out. And do you want to call your panel members up? Rosie? Oh, they're already there. All right. Well, I'll get you to introduce them.
I will. Thank you. So, come join me on our very high chairs. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicola Burton. I'm the Programs Architect for the HASS and Indigenous ARDC. Over the next 2 days, we're going to be hearing a lot from the people who are building the infrastructure with us in the RDC and the researchers who are working with it. So I thought for a bit of a contrast at the start, before we really go into the depth of the disciplines that we're serving, the kinds of tools that we're creating, we could take a step back view and think about the importance of providing research infrastructure for HASS research. It can be a bit disheartening sometimes to meet people who don't get it, who don't understand why digital research infrastructure is important for HASS. You know, people who go, well, HASS research is where you go to the library and you get out 2 books and then you sit in your office for 6 months and then the research comes out. And I'm assuming that by being here, that's an indication that you are all people who get it, who understand why digital research infrastructure is so important for HASS research. So we're not trying to convince you of anything, but I still think that it's really important to reflect on how transformative infrastructure can be for HASS research, and particularly when HASS research is facing a lot of challenges and is at the same time so deeply societally important. So I have a panel with me who are ideally placed to help us talk about that big picture view. So we have Rosie Hicks, our CEO at ARDC. We have Dr. Kylie Brass, who's the Director of Policy and Research at the Australian Academy of the Humanities. Kylie's research background is in literary studies. And then we do, behind me, have Dr. Chris Hatherly, the CEO of the Academy of the Social Sciences in Australia. His research background is in cognitive psychology. Both Kylie and Chris sit on the advisory panel of the HASS and Indigenous RDC and help to provide strategic direction around our investments. So we'll get right into it. I'd like to start by asking you all, why is digital research infrastructure for HASS a priority for your organisation? Maybe Rosie, would you like to kick off?
Yeah. Thanks, Nicola. You didn't say anything about my background.
I didn't. Well, I had assumed that we wouldn't be rushing through your first introduction, and I forgot to give you a second one. If you'd like to give us your background, you can.
I will mention it because it's physics. All right, it's physics and microelectronics.
We still let her in. We forgive you.
So I'm contributing a different opinion,
absolutely,
into the space, which obviously I believe is incredibly important. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. All right. So that's looking at the broad societal contribution. Priority. Why does it matter? Okay. Well, there's a few points. There are 3 points because this bit we've actually prepared, haven't we, Kylie? Yeah. And I'm sure you have too, Chris. When we were thinking about the creation of the Thematic Research Data Commons, we knew that it had to be a small number of significant activities, and we put a lot of time into thinking about what those activities should be. One of the things that we looked at was, where does the National Competitive Grant Funding go? Where does the R&D tax incentive go? That's all well and good, but then we also looked at, where are researchers employed? If we look at the field of research, there is an overwhelming majority of researchers in that cluster that we describe as HASS. And that on its own is telling us we need to pay attention to the needs of that group. Now, historically, what are the barriers to entry? If we use business school talk, Michael Porter's 5 forces, what are the barriers to entry? Well, you can get quite a long way with a pencil and paper, but not anymore. For digital research infrastructure to be truly transformative in this space, we have to come together. We have to speak, as we are, with a really coherent and cohesive voice to government so that we can secure the infrastructure that is essential for HASS research in the current environment.
Thank you. Thanks, Rosie. Can I,
Yeah.
I mean, Chris can go next. Do you want to go next, Chris? Okay, I'm up. So a couple of things. I mean, I paid attention a little bit to the second part of that question, which was why digital research infrastructure is an important aspect of promoting and supporting HASS research. Well, I mean, people will have a bit of an understanding of where I come from, maybe, at the Australian Academy of the Humanities. But I just wanted to give a sense of where we sit institutionally and how we're interacting into the system and why basically it's in our DNA. It matters. This is part of the way in which we engage and promote and advocate for the humanities writ large into the federal government. So at the Australian Academy of the Humanities, we've got a mandate essentially through our founding documents and through our partial funding through a grant in aid from government, through the Education Department administers that through the Higher Education Research Promotion Scheme. That, you know, comes with conditions and scope of activity, which essentially puts the learned academies writ large. I mean, so Chris is from the Social Sciences Academy, I'm the Humanities, but we have counterparts in the sciences, medical and health sciences, and who are the others? Technological sciences and engineering. We're, you know, on Team Humanities, and very much part of what we do is advocate and support through programs and through policy advocacy work. That's my job. So, you know, my job in the Academy as Director of Policy and Research is really to you know, to work in service of that agenda. And we have been doing that over the last 10 years and more. So this road mapping process that is upon us again, and, you know, which has funded this amazing program of work through the ARDC, or funds the ARDC itself since 2019, and funds the HASS and Indigenous Research Data Commons. That's part of the building blocks for next generation HASS research. So I guess my immediate answer to that question is that national research infrastructure, the scale of this activity and scaling this activity and this capability is part of hardwiring HASS into the research system on its own terms and in collaboration with STEM and Indigenous research to build, embed and sustain Australia's capability to deeply and systematically understand how societies, cultures and peoples engage with and adapt to change. So that's come out of, yeah, nice. That's come out a little bit of our strategic planning process, but it's also how we're trying to, I guess, tell the story of what is distinct about this capability, what it delivers on a national stage, and translating that into terms that matter into policy contexts by and large. So there's the road mapping process itself. So obviously everyone knows there's an issues paper out at the moment that will be step one feeder into an exposure draft of the 2026 roadmap. We want to see absolutely investment and scale and continued work in this space, obviously, and fresh and new ideas. But there are a couple of other big pieces of the puzzle that are underway at the moment as well. There's in the national space, you know, so the Tertiary Education Commission, which it's still in interim framing, but will be kicking off next year. It should have a capability focus, a national capability, sovereign capability focus. We've been arguing that into that panel, and by and large, because no one's taking carriage of that national capability, so the national humanities capability, this is one piece of the puzzle that's developing up through the ARDC. The other piece of the puzzle is the strategic examination of R&D. So that's another area in which, you know, HASS needs to be embedded into the system in a much more meaningful way than has happened in the past. And the ARC, the Australian Research Council's National Competitive Grant Program, so that's another layer of the puzzle. They've talked about the Collaborate scheme being LEAF Mark II. That's part of the puzzle of building institutional infrastructure and seeding change. But joining the dots between all of that stuff is about, I guess, what the next phase of work needs to be, and picking up on the outcomes that have been invested in so far in this effort.
Thanks, Kylie. I'm going to be going back and stealing that beautiful sentence of yours from the middle. That'll be very useful to me. Chris, over to you.
Thanks, Nicola, and apologies that I couldn't be there in person. I'm joining from Canberra, from Ngunnawal country. Really wanted to be there, but just couldn't make it work. But no, it's a real privilege, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel. So why is digital research infrastructure and HASS a priority for the Academy of the Social Sciences? Like, as Kylie said, we're one of the 5 learned academies in Australia. We've both got a kind of a funded mandate from the Department of Education to work with and champion social science research systems and processes, but also a responsibility to our elected fellows. We've got 760 social science researchers from across the country who are fellows of the Academy, same model as the other academies. We also, to some extent, represent, upwards of 30,000 other social science researchers working in universities, research institutes, research centres within governments, private sector, community sector, who are all relying increasingly on digital infrastructure to be able to ask and answer the questions that are really the kind of lifeblood of social sciences. It's interesting, Rosie, you're talking about pencil and paper no longer cutting it. 40 years ago, there was virtually no digital research infrastructure. We had some mainframes, we had a few administrative data sets. People were starting to do things on local machines, locally stored, etc. 2025, a vast majority is digital and increasingly digital. We still have libraries, we still have artifacts, we still have physical collections. They're all very important, but with digitization, with increasing administrative data, with increasing research data collections, increasing capacity to put things together, to link data, to synthesize data, it's really expanding exponentially the scope of what social science research from across all disciplines can do, both the questions that can be asked, the results that can be produced, and the way in which those results and findings, that expertise can be applied. So that's really one of our major focuses. Research infrastructure is kind of fundamental to research in the same way as research funding is, in the same way as research training is, in the same way as institutional structures, universities, research centres, etc. are. Our academy, a couple of years back now, with support of some of our major research centres, the ARC Centre of Excellence for Families and Children through the Life course, the Centre of Excellence for Population Ageing Research, and colleagues at the Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making and Society, UQ ANU, they all came together with our academy and well over 100 social science researchers from around the country to produce a decadal plan for social science research infrastructure that was released in 2024, so April last year. And that's a 10-year strategy, which took us 18 months to pull it together, but it was a 10-year strategy that really sets out priorities, principles, goals for social science research infrastructure in Australia, a relatively high degree of consensus about those goals, those priorities across the sector. And that is a kind of a roadmap for our organisation, for our academy, in terms of where we see the priorities going forward.
Thanks, Chris. So we do have a mic up the back so that my colleague Kit can, but no, hang on, wait. My colleague Kit can pass on a couple of questions from online. So if you have any questions, please put them into the chat, but I'm taking advantage of holding the mic and we'll ask a couple more first, but please do, I think we have a mic runner up in the room as well. So if anyone has any questions, hold on to them for just a moment and then I'll throw it to the floor. But first I wanted to dig a bit more into that, Kylie and Chris, thinking about some of the ways that you are seeing digital research infrastructure transforming HASS research? What are some of the things that you're, seeing emerge or change?
Again, I'm going to get a bit, if you don't mind me going first, Chris, a bit meta, and just talk, I guess, panning back at what I can see, having been involved in national research infrastructure policy work since 2008, 9, and the Academy itself, before that, sort of since the beginning of time. So, I can see major gains and wins, I guess. I can also see loss, and I can tell a story of how hard won the current capability investment has been. So I guess if I'm just panning back and looking at what's happened so far in sort of more recent history, we in 2017 ran a Humanities, Arts and Culture Data Summit. Smell of an oily rag, got it up and running. Robin Owens and Rob Cook were talking at that. They were, I guess, the architects in some respects of what ARDC became. So it was about merging ARDC as a capability. It didn't exist quite then. And at that session, we were challenging and kind of convening the sector. Michael Hall was in that room, Nick Teberger was in that room, people in this room were in that room. And I'm probably taking some license here, but I know that, the germination of LDACA, Language Data Commons, was, started with Nick and Michael talking in that room. And so, we can literally date, I guess, that germination of idea in 2017 to where it is now, and we can track that through. So I guess what I'm saying, and the 2019, so the follow-up to the first Humanities, Arts and Culture Data Summit was 2019. ARDC was in play. You and the Academy of the Humanities came together, and DARIA, the international infrastructure, so it was a 3-part forum really to sort of progress the work, and then COVID hit and whatnot, and so we went online for a lot of the work. And then 2021, 22, following the road mapping process, we achieved results finally in getting an NCRIS entity through the ARDC to fund this program of work. And, Jenny Fuster was employed, and, she's not here with us today, but I wish she was, because, she's the font of the knowledge and the wisdom and the power and the grunt and all the talent in kind of bringing together the people. And essentially it's gone from half a page, written, handed down on, this is the stuff that you shall, abstractly, this is what you shall deliver, and it's been operationalised. So, in many ways, I think what you can do is quite literally chart cause and effect and outcomes and achievements based on what's happened so far. I'm really a fan of the fact that it's co-located with the Indigenous capability. I think that's been enormously productive and generative. And I think, collectively, this is a capability that has substance. And I guess what we need to do is really explain very well into policy processes, and that's part of my job, what that capability actually is delivering on and why it's so vital to the future of the infrastructure system writ large.
Thanks, Kylie.
I'm just going to jump in for a second, Kylie. You use the F word. She used the F word. ARDC funding it.
Well, no.
Yeah, but no F word, please. Remember that photo I showed you of the incredible special source that we've got? The ARDC team. I know Kylie well enough that she'll let me do this, don't I? Yeah. Jenny, who has pneumonia and might be online, but I don't know. We hope not. But I think really, Kylie, the bit I'd love to say to you is, hasn't it been an amazing partnership with the focus groups such as LDACA, with the 2 academies, with the ARDC, and everyone putting their heart and soul into getting that over the line? But
and the numbers as well, in terms of, I guess, what the investment, we were talking a little bit before about this. Sorry, Chris, you're going to get a go in a minute.
Maybe.
But, what the investment has been through the NCRIS, but then also what it's leveraged, and so the kind of range of partnerships, the range of entities that have come on board for that. So it's been phenomenal. And, I mean, you can talk to it probably more than I can, but in terms of, I guess, really kind of myth busting a little bit about where HASS and the humanities is my part of that, and the arts is what I care about enormously. But where we're positioned now is actually, you know, in a really good place, I guess, and with sizable investment compared to other entities in NCRIS at the moment.
Okay, Chris, we'll let you
We
go
let
now.
have a go.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I guess how is digital research infrastructure transforming HASS, or in this case, social science research? 3 key points. So firstly, it's changing the way people actually train to be researchers. You know, even back when I did my PhD 20 odd years ago, there was a real expectation that everyone coming through, particularly a quantitative kind of research discipline, would be able to do everything. They'd be able to design their own data sets, they'd be able to set up the databases, they'd be able to collect the data, clean the data, analyze the data, interpret the data, store the data, link the data as relevant, look after all of the data governance issues, whether that's ethics, whether it's consent, privacy, etc. I think increasingly as we get bigger and bigger, as data sets get larger, whether they're data sets that are collected by research teams themselves or administrative data sets that are collected by others, or whether they're linked data sets that bring the two together, that ability for researchers to be able to do everything, to be able to be across the technical details of every single step of the data journey, the data lifetime, is not only it's unrealistic, but it's actually no longer necessary. So that kind of specialization, that skills-based specialization within data infrastructure, the data specialists, the data analysts, the technical people, the compute people, you know, being able to kind of partition that off so that people can really focus on what they're good at, can train to be specialist researchers who, yes, they might collect the data. Yes, they'll need to analyze the data and be able to understand it, but they won't necessarily have to be experts in everything else as well. So I think that's a real benefit. That's kind of, you know, we've seen it in so many other industries, but that kind of specialization really enhances efficiency, it enhances capability. So that's point one. I guess point two is the capacity we now have to link data. It's obviously there's lots of regulatory barriers, there's lots of jurisdictional issues, but being able to link data, particularly administrative data in the social sciences, you know, the big national data collections, the state and territory level data collections, potentially even the regional, the local data collections by local government entities, agencies, and to make that data available is really transforming what people can actually do. You know, the really important social questions, and most social sciences are dealing with issues of society. It's kind of in the badge there. But actually being able to ask new and really pertinent questions about, you know, the fundamental causes of youth disadvantage, for instance, or the fundamental causes, consequences, implications of interventions that are trying to target homelessness or target substance abuse or lift educational attainment within poorer SES regions. You know, people have been working on these questions for a long, long time, and you know, you look at the trends in national outcome scores, in crime rates, in educational disparities. You know, we've been looking at this for a long time. We haven't necessarily been able to effectively address it, even in fields like economics. You know, we've been doing good economics for a long time, but very, very few economists. Economics is one of our social sciences, just to clarify. You know, not many economists predicted the global financial crisis or the downturn. Is that because they weren't clever enough? No, of course not. It's because they didn't have enough data. It's because they didn't have the tools, the systems, the kind of raw material to be able to create the models and interrogate the models that could actually help society to kind of predict forecasts, then navigate through some of those things as well as we would have liked. So I think that kind of evolution of linked data coming together, data becoming accessible to people at enormous scales we haven't ever seen in the social sciences. You know, Rosie, probably in physics, in astronomy, people have been doing this for decades. It's nothing new there, but you know, that kind of petabyte level data in the social sciences really is new. It's not something we were ever able to do before. So that's exciting actually, and It does require a capability shift too. It requires people to be able to work within those new data paradigms, those big data sets, but that's coming. And then the final, I guess, is related to the second point I just made, but artificial intelligence. I'm sure it'll get a good airing today, but the use of AI to be able to work with data, particularly unstructured qualitative data. I'll give an example. That's kind of starting to get a bit of traction in Australia, at least at the discussion stages. The American Voices project. It's been running for a decade in the States. That's a project that's basically using immersive semi-structured interviews with individuals, thousands and thousands of individuals, talking to a researcher for 3 to 4 hours, and then that data being kind of analysed by digital tools, by kind of machine learning, artificial intelligence-based tools to create really, really rich data on individuals and types of individuals, which can then be linked to and complement administrative data sets to really, really provide some incredibly powerful models for understanding social trends, social phenomena, predicting as well. The shift there is that those kind of immersive interviews are moving away from people talking to a researcher, which is, valuable but very time consuming, to people talking to a machine, to a bot. And the chatbots collecting huge amounts of very, very rich qualitative data, and then that data being analysed, collated into really, really rich kind of digital profiles of individuals. There's lots of different things that can be done then, de-identification, synthetic data sets, digital twins, etc. That's just an example of the kinds of things that are in the pipeline. And it's infrastructure projects, but getting that kind of infrastructure project set up in a big way in Australia could actually be very transformative as well.
Thanks, Chris. My goodness, I'm jealous of the idea of going through my degree without having to learn 3 programming languages, survey design, and statistical analysis in depth. What a magical future we live in. And it makes me think, you talked about increasing access to large-scale data, and I think that is very true for the humanities and arts as well as the social sciences. We have those massive, rich collections of data that are currently so hard to access because of the way that they are stored and formatted. It's just such an enormous human effort to get them into a place where they're digitally accessible. And now we're moving into a world where, with the right infrastructure in place, those can be open to research. It's pretty wonderful. I have one last question of my own before I throw to the floor, which is, what is your vision for HASS research in the future? What could we achieve with the support of digital research infrastructure? Does anyone want to go first?
I'll go first. And in fact, you said, I'm going to steal those words about the collections infrastructure, because I think that's, hugely part of the missing piece of the puzzle, I guess, in terms of actually delivering on kind of the next phase of that and the promise of that, I guess, in this ecosystem and more broadly. So again, I'm going to read some words out to you that I'm trialling out for our submission. So they're not fully tested and all the things, but very much, what's sharpening my mind is the road mapping process. So I'm saying at the moment, and looking at the future, that HASS research infrastructure is central to Australia's self-understanding and sovereign capability in a fragmenting international order. And thinking about, what our Welcome to Country did for us. We did a lot of things for us, but there were a few framings there that really helped me. One is Nawi, and thinking about that canoe and that scene. What did he say? The fire hose of rubbish coming at us. And there was something else. And talking about health, but health in the round. So it's about not just the science and tech of health, but, human and cultural and social determinants of health and those. There's so many aspects of that Welcome to Country that we need to hear and think through. So in so many ways, those 3 threads are part of, I guess, the future of what I see HASS and Indigenous research infrastructure delivering. So, you know, investments have been made in filling some of the gaps there, you know, but there's a lot more to do and build on, essentially. And so what I'm seeing in the 2026 roadmap is the need to strengthen public research infrastructure, in effect. What we're, you know, this isn't privatised infrastructure. This is infrastructure for research, you know, and for our public universities and public research entities. And so it's part of a thriving democracy. You know, it's part of that democratic agenda in a lot of ways. It's part of safeguarding knowledge. It's part of, you know, invigorating knowledge and testing knowledge and contesting knowledge. And I see HASS ingenuity and leadership, which is, you know, really stood up over these last few years. I mean, it's been there, but it's had mechanisms by which it's really been active and collaborative, but using that to really prosecute that agenda and build, you know, bridges with largely, I mean, you know, there's private sector partners, but very much in the case of building on some of the public sector partnerships. So that's galleries, libraries, archives, museums. It's also, you know, the government entities, and it's about thinking about our own research, you know, generated from within, and, you know, the question of how we curate at scale humanities data. So there's 3 things that we said in our first submission way back in March to the roadmap, and I'm, you know, really sort of circling around those again and sort of thinking, is this where we're going to land? Because we're being asked to respond, you know, in the humanities part of that issues paper to 3 things. You know, what top 3 priorities? Why is it always 3? Why couldn't it be 5? Why couldn't it be 10? You know, but top 3 priorities, and the ones that we identified or went with in the first, because again, it was the, you know, what are your top 3? We talked about the Indigenous research capability. So, you know, NCRIS does not have a cross-cutting Indigenous research capability. It has, through Marcy Langton and team's effort, actually, and the ARDC's platform and investment and partnership, actually gotten to the point of maturity where it literally is going to be a capability. It's been identified as a standalone capability, and, you know, they're consulting on that. You know, that's due to this room and the work that people have been put in that space. The same, I think, with LDACA. LDACA has reached a level of maturity potentially, you know, and that's again through that process. Relatively short-term investment in seeding that capability and building and growing it. So we talked very much about the Indigenous research capability. National research collections infrastructure, what does that look like? And I think there's some brilliant ideas. Some of it's coming through your partnership with the Community Data Lab and what's being proposed in the next sort of phase of effort there. And then, you know, this what we talked about is an integration and coordination capability, you know, for the humanities broadly, you know, so, and that's got to start to bring, I think, one of the biggest things to the fore is, what does an AI capability look like? And it's not a technical capability, it's a depth capability, it's a knowledge capability, and how do we build that into systems? So that's a huge part of, I guess, the national workforce strategy. It's a huge part of, I guess, the data capture and digitisation agenda. It's a huge part of, how we are planning kind of, you know, ahead and bringing humanities methodologies into that agenda.
Thanks. And that's you spoke about some of those core challenges, and I know I have colleagues in the room who are working directly on those. You know, if you talk about the social aspects of health and how health and other aspects of social well-being fit together, then I can point at Wojtek and look at the work that you're doing in the Social Sciences Research Infrastructure Network to pull together those kinds of data to ask those questions. And when you talk about the fire hose of rubbish, that's really something that can be examined through the tools that the Australian Internet Observatory is putting together, looking at the kinds of information that are being presented to us in such high volumes and with such variety that it's so difficult to examine without those tools. And I don't think we have, oh, well, hang on, of course we do. We have a team who are putting together work over the next year or so looking at Hansard data, which will hopefully help us to understand, help us to communicate as well more clearly to the public how government is operating and how it's interacting with social issues, which hopefully will help us as we work through this difficult time around trust and democracy. Your discussion of the Indigenous capability does remind me that I should do some context setting, that we're talking a lot about HASS in this conversation. Obviously, we are the HASS and Indigenous research capability, RDC. And that is an interesting juxtaposition that really comes from that initial departmental investment into ARDC. It's not necessarily an automatic, assumed grouping, right? Because Indigenous data is so much more than HASS data. We have Indigenous health data, we have Indigenous environmental data. So it's something that I try to always say, and I forgot to do it this time, that we like to be very careful to say that while we benefit enormously from having the Indigenous research capability work alongside the HASS work, the Indigenous research capability work is so much broader than HASS. So we're focusing today in our discussion on HASS, and that does include those aspects of research with Indigenous data that are included within HASS, but Indigenous data is a very broad area. Right, I should ask again some of my other panelists about your vision for HASS research in the future. Chris?
Yeah, sure. So thanks, thanks, Kylie. Thanks, Nicola. And I'd just like to echo as well, Nicola, that that point about Indigenous data governance, Indigenous data sovereignty, Indigenous cultural intellectual property. These are all things which we weren't even talking about particularly. Maybe we're just starting 10 years ago, but 15 years ago, they certainly weren't on people's radars, at least in my experience. And I think the fact that we are here now, as you said, with an Indigenous data research capability as part of the HASS+I Data Commons, and as Kylie flagged, the very likely prospect that will stand alone in the next iteration of the roadmap as a kind of an independent research infrastructure capability. That's good progress. It could have been faster, of course, but it's really important. But it's more too than just Indigenous data capability in its own right. It's about the capability of all researchers who are dealing with data that has anything to do with Indigenous people, and that's many social scientists, most in fact, really having a deep, well-informed understanding of what that means, how to do it, what the considerations are, what the cultural sensitivities are, what the potential risks are, how it should be done well, what the ethical guidelines and principles are that kind of govern the way in which Indigenous data is collected consultatively with communities ideally, but if not, then in a way that kind of respects and has a view towards the benefit that those Indigenous communities will derive from the research that's being done on the data that was collected about them. So I think that's a really key principle, and one that I think we'll continue to see grow and developed, not just in specific Indigenous data kind of capabilities, but also across all of humanities, social science, arts research, many science disciplines as well. So that's point one, I guess. What would we like to see happen going down the track? Our decadal plan for social science research infrastructure that I mentioned before it, the primary goal set out in that document was for a standalone Australian research infrastructure ecosystem for the social sciences. A bit of a mouthful, but the acronym ARES is one that does roll off the tongue. That was our 10-year goal, to have kind of a standalone national research data infrastructure capability for the social sciences. It's interesting, the collection of logos, NCRIS capabilities that Rosie showed in her introductory speech. There's a few of them there that are HASS related. I think we've got ORAN, we've got ARDC, obviously, PHRN as well, but the rest are all, for the most part, are all STEM capabilities, science capabilities. And we don't talk about a single science research infrastructure capability. We talk about the multiple science research infrastructure capabilities, which are absolutely necessary and warranted because science in the STEM disciplines is so enormously diverse. And I think, if you look at it, scratch the surface, the same is true for the HASS disciplines as well. There's enormous diversity in the disciplines and the kinds of questions people ask and the kinds of research that are done. Perhaps not quite as extreme. I mean, You know, the difference between a molecular biologist and a cosmologist is perhaps a little bit greater than the difference between an anthropologist or an archaeologist and somebody doing economics on administrative data sets. But the fact remains there are very significant differences. And I think, you know, over time we would like to see an increasing diversity of dedicated, discrete capabilities that serve the needs of those research fields, the people working in those things, in ways which actually allow a more focused, a more optimized and efficient benefit back to society. Obviously, there's a challenge. You know, there's not unlimited money. NCRIS funding is generous, but there's lots of demands. I'm sure there'll be 3 or 4 times more proposals, priorities put to the roadmap process than there is capacity to accommodate them. So, you know, we're kind of conscious that we're in a competitive space there. But, you know, I suppose really what we'd like to see is some of the I'm not sure if they're children of the ARDC in these data commons and the projects kind of leaving home and going off to live their own lives as independent capabilities. Perhaps a better frame might be students at a ARDC as a selective school for very gifted, promising students who come through and develop and grow until they can graduate and move on to do things in a big way outside, and new students can come back through, new kind of capabilities, new priorities can come back through as that kind of incubator model. I hope I'm not creating a new role there for the ARDC, Rosie, but you know, that's, I guess, where we'd like to see things develop. And the SSRIN that Wojtek is running, the Social Science Research Infrastructure Network, is, I think, a really promising first step towards that vision.
Thanks, Chris. I'll pass on to Rosie.
Siblings, Chris. Siblings. Don't age us prematurely. Okay, wonderful. I completely agree with the visions put forward by Kylie and with Chris. I don't think I'm going to agree with your time frame. What I see right now is enormous progress has been made in bringing communities together to have a voice to government. We've been able to get an ambitious program of work underway with the 6 different focus areas, and that's incredibly exciting. I think the advances in artificial intelligence that Chris flagged, it's all around us. We then balance that with other tensions such as cybersecurity and ethics, and the HASS and Indigenous RDC should be at the vanguard of those activities. That's really an enormously important contribution for Australia. But there is a reason for 3 bullet points. The cohesion that this sector needs to put to government in its arguments is at the most critical time. We cannot dilute the argument and risk it being overwhelmed by another request for a radio telescope. Now is the time to be describing really big, significant capability that lets us carve out the pathway. I want to just reflect for a moment and to say that ARDC has been able to contribute 32 million to the HASS and Indigenous RDC. But that doesn't capture, it doesn't include the salaries of any ARDC staff. That's in addition, the time. There's an enormous number of us here today. I've written a list here. It doesn't include the governance of the organisation, the board, the advisory committees. We have our annual general meeting, the auditor, the lawyers, the development of user policies. We have our director of outreach here in Keith Russell, all of the promotions, the established systems and processes, the HR systems, the payroll, the really boring stuff that we would all grind to a halt without, particularly the payroll bit. All of that is an ARDC foundational contribution that we are delighted to do during this incubation phase. And incubation is a way that I think about this. We're seeding something, we're growing something. But I then say, well, this phase of the activity, we're building this incredibly important infrastructure. We're working with community to make sure that we're able to focus on the right things, whatever those focus areas are. But now's the time to be thinking about, remember when I started by saying, why does this matter? It matters because of the huge fraction of Australian researchers that are active in this space. So building the infrastructure, that old phrase, necessary but not sufficient, my vision for the future, my 3-year, 5-year vision is that we're then looking at the amazing research outputs and subsequent flow on to policy and other areas that have been enabled by this capability. We're so much at the build phase. We're not at the look at what we have achieved with this investment. And I, I am bringing us back a little bit. I am grounding us. That's just, you have to balance the 10-year amazing vision with well, what do we need to do right now to really cement the pathway for that vision? And so my message to everyone is, as we come back next year and the year after, let's start celebrating the research outputs from this investment.
Yeah, thanks, Rosie. I think it is, as you'll see over the next couple of days, we have some of our focus areas of infrastructure are a little more mature, and some of them are halfway through an initial build process. So I think it's going to be a couple of years before we see, and if you think about the amount of time it takes, as we've been discussing over the last few days, the amount of time it takes to get us from infrastructure is available to researchers are aware of it, to researchers know how to use it, and then they're confident enough to build it into their work. And then, so that process from availability through to impact is a multi-year one. So I do take your point about the need to follow that through to the impact that we can then point to start to secure additional investment in the sector.
Can I just say one quick thing? I guess, oftentimes the story of NCRIS is, that we haven't made progress in national research infrastructure for humanities, arts and social sciences or Indigenous. That's a myth. That's not the case. HASS hasn't been standing still. The cultural sector hasn't been standing still. These things have developed oftentimes through sporadic funding, ad hoc funding, through the absolute, power of people power, essentially, and sort of, researchers finding a way, through, a range of funding sources and other ways and means. So what I would say as well, and I totally take Rosie's point about, what are the building blocks, what's next step, what's the sort of pathway forward, so it isn't, and in fact, Ron Decker, who sits on the advisory panel, is fantastic for giving us a European vision. And he's really always says to Jenny how much he's kind of learnt. I mean, Ron might not express it in these terms, but how much he's admires the way in which this Australia and the ARDC process through which this investment has been realised and this capability is starting to grow, of how that's built, that sometimes Europe's gone too big too early, and it's backfilling, I guess, a little bit in terms of the way it's gone. So he's really really appreciating that. But I will say that I hate the maturity word sometimes, because it does infantilise us, HASS sometimes, you aren't grown up enough to have yourselves a capability or whatever. And it's not meant in quite those terms. But there's a maturity of research in our sector for sure. There's a maturity of partnerships, in various quarters. There are mature institutions that we engage with. What I think can help us accelerate in the next phase is actually working those connections and partnerships. So what does it look fully to, and I know you've already done this through, various parts of the program, partner with the glam sector? You know, what does that actually look like concretely, you know, and you know, meaningfully in a not necessarily fully co-designed potentially, but there's an ownership of both those things, you know, as to where the meeting points are to achieve results. What does it look like to dial in? And I mean, I know, Chris, you talked about your Centre of Excellence for, I'm going to say life course. I can't remember what it's called. But in our world, you know, and in the world of here, I mean, how terrific it is to interact with vanguard institutions that have a life and an afterlife, the centres of excellence in the Australian ecosystem. What will it look like when we've got sort of pathways between what is a sort of linkage discovery level program to centres of excellence as part of the new National Competitive Grant Program? You know, so the Centre of Excellence for Automated Decision Making in Society is part of this puzzle. You know, they're actually underwriting and being involved as partners in developing capability. Centres of Excellence, I mean, the overlay of the ARC and what it's invested in and NCRIS and HASS, you know, you can actually chart where those some of that synchronicity is. Bioplatforms relied on infrastructure that was very much a kind of HASS STEM infrastructure that the former Centre of Excellence, KBAR, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you get my point, you know. So there's outfits and infrastructures and entities in the system that are part of the puzzle going forward, and connecting that up, including with infrastructures that meet a national research remit but aren't funded through NCRIS. You know, so what does that look like in a joined up space?
Yeah,
So I think this brings us to a really nice mapping point. And the bit that I'd like to pull out here is the difference between a research activity, such as a Centre of Excellence, and an infrastructure. And I think it's really important that when we talk about an infrastructure maturity, we're talking about it in a product sense. Now, this is really not normal for the sector. You know, we don't think about infrastructure as products in the same way. And so one of the things that we've done, stand up, Jamie, go on. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce Jamie Archer, the product manager for the HASS and Indigenous Community Data Lab. And that signals, you can sit down now, thanks. You will get me back later. Thank you, Jamie. So what that signals in our language, and it just comes back to how important language is, we now have a team of product managers at the ARDC. We're still currently advertising for the manager of that group. I think it's just about to close. Get the plug in there. But it's a really important shift in how we are thinking about the provision of infrastructure. And I think coming back to Kylie's point about wherever the infrastructure sits in the system, it's good for us to remember that the 2026 roadmap is not an NCRIS roadmap. It's a national research infrastructure roadmap. So it could be things outside NCRIS that we're bringing together. And then if we can get that interface between, for example, the centres of excellence and the research infrastructures really working well. Centres of excellence, GLAM organisations, research infrastructures, then I think we can really get the whole thing to sing.
Yeah, and I think it's very a good time to highlight the fact that the large focus area work that we're doing now all builds on existing work that was out there, often that began with groups of researchers who found a problem, knew that they needed a solution, and started to pull together a team to make it work. And what ARDC has been able to do is to help to lift and support those groups who are responsible for putting together those initial those foundations of that infrastructure. And I think that that is, we're not starting anything from scratch, and it's an important part of how we can support and grow HASS infrastructure going forward, is finding what is out there, what's being built, because it's being built by people who know that they need it. So it is important, right? We can see that it's important and we can lift it up. I might, unless anyone had any further comments.
If I could jump in, I mean, thank you, Rosie, for that. Those points. I think infrastructure as products is absolutely spot on, and probably to a large extent, some of the role of organisations like ours, the academies, and others represented in the room here, is to help those people who aren't in the room to actually understand where things are, what is actually available, the new tools, the new products that are there, how they can be accessed, how they can be used. Everyone's so busy with their day jobs and their, additional day jobs and their families and all of the other responsibilities of life, that staying abreast of some of this stuff when it's not people's core focus is really, really challenging. So I think, as much as anything, we're here to partner with ARDC and other infrastructure organisations, just to kind of help people know and understand what's there and how things are developing and what's actually possible now. The other point I just wanted to quickly make on timeframes. I mean, I absolutely take your point, Rosie, that a 10-year vision is good and grand, but there's a lot that happens in between year 1 and year 10 that needs to be kind of tangible and concrete and demonstrate value along the way in order for the bigger vision to be realised. But I am always reminded too, if you go back not even 10 years to the 2018 Research Infrastructure Investment Plan. So this was the government's response to the 2016 roadmap. There was funding allocated to the roadmap focus area of platforms for humanities, arts and social sciences of $53.4 million in total. Part of that actually funded the scoping study, which underpinned the current HASS+I research data commons. So that was the genesis of what we're here talking about today. There was also funding for ORAN, for the Australian Urban Research Infrastructure Network, and a little bit for the Atlas of Living Australia. But the majority of that $53.4 million was actually invested in new buildings for the entomology collections at CSIRO under HASS, Platforms for Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences. It's probably an unfortunate labelling error rather than anything particularly deliberate, but just 7 or 8 years ago, we were in a situation where an official government document had infrastructure for insect collections as a HASS capability. So, we've come a long way since then. And I'm really excited and optimistic about how far we can go in the next 10 years, with lots and lots of really valuable, visible, beneficial milestones along the way.
That's ambition is one of the ARDC values, Rosie. Get in before you can say it. I think we have some time to throw to any questions from the floor. Yep, cool. We've got 10 minutes. That's at least 2 questions. Does anyone have a question? Are there any questions online? Okay, then I'm just going to throw straight back into my list of questions that I want to ask. I think we've been talking.
You know what? I actually think, can we ask them what they think?
Yeah, go for it.
Like, so if we say, what are your top 3 priorities? What do you need into the next? I mean, we say roadmap, you say project, program, whatever, what's in front of you. What do you need next? How do you grow?
Introduce yourself as well, Sach.
Hi, Sach Singh. I'm the CEO of QSIF. So we partner on a few different things, and I am an imposter. I am a biologist, sorry.
Again, that's fine. That's
look, I have been lucky enough to work with a lot of the humanities researchers and social scientists. And in fact, I think I had something to do with the Australian Internet Observatory a while back in getting that up and going. But I guess one of the observations over about 10, 15 years of kind of being in research infrastructure is I always get the, maybe it's a perception, but I always get the sense that sometimes in the HASS community, there's a bit of a selective bias in that what is formulated is not always representative of the diversity of the community. And what especially in terms of thinking about, and I know we don't like the word maturity, but I do see people in the, like PhDs and HDRs who struggle with Excel spreadsheets to really move into the kind of the competencies they need, whereas there's a lot of focus on really high-end, not high-end, but digital humanities that are a lot more advanced, like in building things that are products. But I feel I get the sense that we are still leaving a large community behind. And how do we tackle that challenge is, I guess, a question I'm posing.
Can I answer a couple of things have come to my mind as you've asked that question. I don't know that that's NCRIS's problem per se, or the ARDC's problem per se. I think it's a collective problem, and I think there are different parts of, people own that differently, So there's a massive kind of literacy and data literacy agenda that needs to roll out, and that might be different according to different disciplines, whether or not you're working with qualitative and quantitative and so forth. And so, so I actually think that's a massive missing piece of the puzzle. I do think if we're thinking about digital capability, that's different, and data capability to AI capability, but AI is part of that puzzle. I do think that, I heard Barney Glover talk last week, the Skills Commissioner, who's also sitting on the ATEC, so the Tertiary Education Commission. ATEC should be taking carriage of some of the skills needs going forward. They are smashing, because they've got a consultation out at the moment on the National Skills Taxonomy. They're not talking, hard and soft skills, thank God. They're really kind of getting to grips with the types of skills in frame and what's needed. I know Michael and others, and some of it's a little bit based on how bioplatforms had done some of their work around thinking what that continuum of skills needs are, so it might not be one person needs to kind of bone up on all the things, this kind of amazing human that can do all the wits and whatses, but, how do you build kind of a literacy and then carry through to a capability, a deeper knowledge and data capability. So I think it's a massive challenge. I actually think it's one of the major priorities going forward, the skills and capability agenda. So, but I think there's different owners of that issue, and, it's at a discipline level, I think it needs to function. One of the things that we're being asked in the roadmap is, do you need it's a workforce and a capability and a skills build. Do you need specific kind of specialist HASS capability or generic? Well, both. And what does that need to look like, in terms of a taxonomy and a plan forward? So in a way, I think we need to articulate that and work through, our blueprint, a kind of plan of action around how to do that. Because at the moment, we're all divided and trying to solve some of that problem at project level or even just at university level. What does that look like for the system writ large?
I have the benefit of having read the ACRI response to the issues paper, penned by Satch and published last week. And I'm coming back to your question, Kylie, do we need specific skill sets in this space? And you've quite rightly said both. But I would push on that a little bit, particularly I think Satch very much came down in the both camp. And I'm going to say, no, I don't agree that it's the same across different disciplines. And my reason for saying that is I think it's far more complex. And I think that we have to understand the researcher, what it is they're trying to do and where they're starting from. So the observation that we've got some HDR students really struggling with Excel, that's a life skill, isn't it? We just need everyone, whether it's Excel or whether it's asking AI because Excel's becoming redundant. Can you do this for me? But there are basic things that we've got to make sure wherever researchers are starting from, we recognise their starting point. We recognise the journey that they wish to undertake and then tailor the skills package around them. And I do think for different types of research, whether it's in humanities or arts or social sciences or Indigenous data, the skills we need to consider, we have to have a careful think about how they differ, what are the foundational ones, but what's our role in thinking about provision of skills that are absolutely specific to a researcher cohort.
Oh, we have another question.
Hi, I'm Nick Tierberger from the University of Melbourne and Director of Paradisic. I think Kylie talked about the articulation of Centres of Excellence and other ARC projects, and what we have is a constant churn of funded projects and research materials produced and lost, and that's much more research data is being lost than is being preserved. We don't have proper storage. I know it's a dirty word to talk about storage, it's a dirty word to talk about digitisation apparently, but these are critical for humanities research. We need long-term storage, curated storage. So Paradisic has done this for 23 years. And the Centre of Excellence that I was involved in had a lot of data that was produced that is stored in Paradisic. Unfortunately, the websites, again, a whole other issue. Primary research outputs for humanities research websites. And who's preserving websites? Nobody. Maybe the National Library under Pandora. But, you know, long-term curation has to be critical for all of the things that we're doing. And I know ARDC keeps saying we're only funded for 3 years, we're only funded for 4 years, and we can't do that. But we have to. We have to put it up. I mean, nobody's throwing away the petabytes of astrophysical data that are being produced every year by square kilometre arrays and other things. So it's critical that we have curated storage into the future.
So I'm really conscious of needing to be prompt at 11 and watching over the back of your shadow on the time. So I would simply say that yes, in its most recent set of proposals to government, ARDC has gone as far as saying, okay, we might not be here for the long haul, but you've got to tackle this now. And we have put in for some storage. And so that's a brief answer, and I'm really happy to share material on that. But I'm making sure I hand back for the 11 o'clock. So let's pick this up in the tea break.
I think that's a bright spot to end on. Thank you all for your thoughts. I think it's a nice background to now spend the rest of the symposium diving into, well, you know, if research infrastructure is so important to us, what are we building? What can it do? What are the problems that it's solving? And that's what we'll be covering over the next 2 days. So we're about to go to morning tea, but I believe we're a couple of minutes early. So I will vamp. No, I think what I might do is I'll close us off, and then as we pause to go to morning tea at 11 o'clock, I ask us all to observe a minute's silence to reflect on the human cost of war and to remember those who have lost their lives. Yeah, at 11 o'clock, we'll take that minute's silence. But I'll thank our speakers again. And yeah, after that minute's silence, we'll head over for some coffee and morning tea. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.